There's a story, almost forgotten by time, of a goddess who once stole the sun and moon from the sky. Not out of malice, but out of loneliness. She hid them in a chest beneath the ocean, plunging the world into darkness, until a clever mortal, armed with nothing but riddles, tricked her into setting them free. This tale, like so many others, was whispered across generations, buried beneath layers of dust and newer myths. But today, we're pulling these stories back into the light. Across cultures and centuries, ancient mythology has been humanity's first mirror, reflecting our deepest fears, wildest dreams, and the timeless battles between gods and mortals, love and vengeance, fate and free will. These aren't just stories, they're the building blocks of civilizations, the roots of our modern legends, and the echoes of voices that refused to be silenced by time. Think about the last time you heard a myth that made your pulse quicken. Maybe it was the thunder of Zeus's wrath, the cunning of Anansi's webs, or the tragic beauty of Orpheus turning too soon. These tales don't just entertain, they unravel the mysteries of human nature itself. Why do we chase power? What would we sacrifice for love? How far would we go to defy the gods? In this journey through 30 unforgettable myths, we'll wander through battlefields where heroes rise and fall, peer into palaces where gods play cruel games with mortal lives, and uncover hidden legends that even history books overlook. From the epic sagas of Greece and Rome to the haunting whispers of Mesopotamian demons, from the fiery dragons of the East to the trickster spirits of the Americas, every corner of the ancient world has a story that will leave you breathless. So let's step into the labyrinth together. Some of these tales will feel familiar, like old friends waiting to greet you. Others will strike like lightning, strange, dazzling, and impossible to ignore. But all of them share one thing: they've survived for a reason. Whether it's the sheer audacity of a mortal challenging the divine, the heartbreaking price of a wish granted, or the simple magic of a story that feels truer than history, these myths hold a power that refuses to fade. By the time we're done, you'll see the world differently, because every myth, no matter how ancient, is really about us, our hopes, our flaws, and the eternal question of what it means to be human. Ready to begin, the stories are waiting. Before time itself, there was only the endless emptiness of Ginnungagap, a yawning void where nothing existed, not even silence. Then came the collision that sparked all creation. From the north surged rivers of ice so ancient they groaned under their own weight, while from the south poured waves of fire so fierce they scorched the darkness itself. Where these two forces met, the very first being took shape: Ymir, the primordial giant, born from melting frost that dripped with life. His body was the landscape, his sweat became the seas, his bones the mountains, his skull the sky. But this was no gentle birth. The Norse cosmos was forged in violence. From Ymir's flesh rose the first gods, Odin and his brothers, who saw the giant's chaotic reign and knew the world needed order. What came next was ruthless even by mythic standards. They slaughtered Ymir, using his corpse to build the realms, his blood to fill the oceans, his eyebrows to fence in Midgard, the land of humans. But creation wasn't complete without Yggdrasil, the colossal world tree whose roots drink from 3 sacred wells and whose branches hold the 9 realms like fruit. Here, gods and mortals alike live under the shadow of prophecy, for the Norse world was born with its end already written, Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. Picture Yggdrasil for a moment, its trunk stretching beyond sight, home to dragons, eagles, and whispering spirits. In Asgard, Odin rules from his golden hall, trading an eye for wisdom as he prepares for the inevitable battle. Below, in frozen Niflheim, the dead wait in fog-shrouded halls, while fire giants in Muspelheim sharpen their swords for the final war. Even the tree itself suffers, nibbled by stags, carved by fate, yet standing unshaken. This isn't just a myth of beginnings, it's a tale of cycles where creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. What's haunting is how the Norse saw their gods, mighty but mortal, doomed to fight and fall when the wolf Fenrir breaks free and the serpent Jormungand poisons the seas. Unlike other myths where order triumphs, Ragnarok promises only rebirth through ruin, a world consumed by flames only to rise again from the waves green and new. Perhaps that's why this story endured. It doesn't flinch from darkness. It tells us that even gods can bleed, that endings aren't final, and that from the wreckage of one world, another always begins. Now imagine waking up one morning to find the most powerful weapon in the cosmos gone. That was Thor's reality when Mjolnir, his legendary hammer, vanished without a trace. The god of thunder wasn't just disarmed, he was unraveled. Because in Norse myth, Mjolnir wasn't just a weapon. It was the guardian of Asgard, the symbol of divine authority, and the only thing standing between the gods and chaos. When Loki discovered the culprit Thrym, a giant with a grudge and a demand, the stakes became absurdly personal. Thrym wouldn't return the hammer unless he got Freya, the goddess of love, as his bride. What followed was one of mythology's most outrageous rescue missions. Freya, understandably, refused to be traded like a bargaining chip, her fury shaking the halls of Asgard. But without her, how could they retrieve Mjolnir? Enter Loki, the god of mischief, with a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. Thor would go to Thrym's wedding disguised as Freya. Picture the mightiest of the Aesir, the Stormbringer himself, squeezed into a bridal gown, his fiery red beard hidden behind a veil, trying to pass as the most beautiful goddess in the 9 realms. The wedding feast was a masterclass in tension and dark comedy. Thrym, overjoyed with his prize, barely noticed his bride devouring an entire ox, 8 salmon, and 3 barrels of mead, behavior that should have been a dead giveaway. When the giant leaned in for a kiss and saw Thor's eyes blazing like forge fires through the veil, Loki's quick thinking saved the day. Freya hasn't slept in 8 nights, he lied, waiting for this moment. Convinced, Thrym finally ordered Mjolnir brought forth to bless the union. The second that hammer touched Thor's hands, the disguise evaporated. What followed wasn't a wedding, it was a slaughter. Thunder shook the hall as Thor reclaimed his destiny, leaving no giant standing. Beneath the laughter, this myth reveals something profound. Mjolnir wasn't just a tool of destruction. It was a sacred object, so vital that even the gods would debase themselves to recover it. Thor's humiliation underscores a truth the Norse knew well. Power isn't just about strength, it's about adaptability, even when it costs you pride. And Loki, he proves that chaos can be a saving grace, so long as it's pointed at the right enemy. This tale also cracks open Norse culture's unique blend of brutality and humor. While Greek heroes dueled with tragic dignity, Thor dressed as a bride and ate a feast mid-crisis. It's a reminder that even in their myths, the Norse refused to take themselves too seriously, because in a world destined to burn, sometimes laughter is the only armor left. There was a prophecy the gods couldn't outrun. No amount of power, no clever trick could change it. Fenrir, the great wolf, would devour Odin himself when Ragnarok came. But the gods weren't ones to surrender to fate without a fight. So they raised the beast among them, pretending kindness while watching his jaws grow wider, his strength more monstrous. At first, it seemed a game Fenrir playfully snapping at the air, his claws scoring the floors of Asgard's halls. But when the wolf's head grew large enough to blot out the sun, their smiles turned to silence. The gods tried chains first, thick links of iron wrapped twice around Fenrir's neck. He shook them off like dew. They forged heavier bonds, anchors meant to hold mountains, and still the wolf laughed as they shattered. That's when they turned to deception. The dwarves crafted Gleipnir, a ribbon thin as silk but woven from impossibilities. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish. It looked harmless, but Fenrir sensed the trap. Only if one of you places a hand in my mouth as collateral. He growled, the gods froze, all but Tyr, the god of war, who stepped forward and laid his right hand between those teeth. The moment Fenrir realized he couldn't break free, his jaws snapped shut. Tyr's sacrifice bought the gods time, but at what cost? Fenrir's howls shook the 9 realms, his rage twisting into something colder calculation. He'd bide his time, gnawing at his bonds until the stars aligned for Ragnarök. And Tyr, he walked away fewer yet greater. His missing hand became a symbol. Even honor has its price. This isn't just a story about a monster bound. It's about the inevitability the gods feared their own doom dressed in fur and fangs. They knew Fenrir's role in Ragnarök was fixed, yet they chained him anyway, buying centuries at the cost of his wrath. That's the heart of Norse mythology, not heroes defying fate, but meeting it head-on, even when the outcome is written in blood. Every tug at Gleipnir, every growl from the depths of that cave was a ticking clock. The gods didn't just bind a wolf, they set their own destruction in motion. Poetry was never meant for mortals, not until Odin decided to steal it from the giants. This wasn't just any theft. The mead of poetry, brewed from the blood of a murdered god and mixed with honey, held the power to turn any drinker into a skald, a wordsmith capable of spinning reality into verse. It was guarded by Suttungr, a giant who kept it locked inside a mountain protected by his daughter Gunnlod. To retrieve it, Odin would need to become more than a god. He'd need to become a worm. The plan began with betrayal. Odin disguised himself as a wandering laborer and convinced Suttungr's brother, Borgi, to let him work his fields for a price. 9 servants lay dead, their throats slit by each other's sides in a frenzy Odin orchestrated. When Borgi begged for help, the disguised god demanded a sip of the legendary mead as payment. Reluctantly, Borgi agreed, drilling into the mountain with an auger while Odin shrank himself into a serpent's form, slithering through the narrow tunnel into Gunnlod's cavern. For 3 nights he played the lover, whispering promises to the giantess until she let him drink, not once but 3 times from the sacred vats. Each sip filled him with the mead's power until the entire supply surged within him. Then came the escape. Odin shapeshifted again, this time into an eagle, bursting from the mountain with Suttungr in furious pursuit. As the giant's wings beat closer, Odin spat the mead into waiting vats in Asgard, though some drops fell to Midgard, explaining why inspiration strikes so unevenly among mortals. What's fascinating isn't just the audacity of the theft, but what it reveals about the Norse worldview. Poetry wasn't a gentle art, it was something wrested from chaos, born of blood and deception. Odin, the god of wisdom, had to debase himself as a laborer, a serpent, a false lover, even a thief to claim it. The myth acknowledges a hard truth: genius often comes at a cost, and inspiration isn't given, it's taken. Those random drops that fell to earth, they're the reason some poets burn bright while others struggle for a single perfect line. The mead's uneven distribution mirrors life itself, unfair, unpredictable, and drenched in divine mischief. This tale also cracks open Odin's contradictions. The same god who hanged himself from Yggdrasil for knowledge now wallowed in deceit to claim another kind of power. It suggests that in Norse eyes, wisdom and poetry were 2 sides of the same coin, one bought with pain, the other stolen through cunning. And Gunnlod, her betrayal cuts deeper than Suttungr's rage. She trusted, and in doing so, became the conduit for the greatest gift ever spilled into the human world. The mead's theft wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder that even gods must sometimes kneel in the dirt to grasp the sublime. The dreams started first, dark visions that coiled around Baldur's sleep like serpents, whispering of his death. The fairest of the Aesir, beloved by gods and mortals alike, began to wither under the weight of these omens. His mother Frigg, the goddess of prophecy, knew better than to dismiss them. So she embarked on a desperate mission, traveling every corner of the 9 realms to extract a single promise from all things. fire and water, iron and stone, even the poisons of the earth, that none would harm her son. What she overlooked in her exhaustion was the mistletoe, too young, too harmless to swear an oath. It should have been a moment of triumph when the gods tested Baldur's newfound invulnerability. They hurled spears, struck with axes, laughed as weapons shattered against his skin like twigs. But Loki, ever the architect of chaos, saw the flaw in Frigg's plan. Disguised as an old woman, he tricked her into revealing the one weakness she'd left unbound. Then he carved a dart from that forgotten mistletoe and placed it in the hands of Hodder, Baldur's blind brother. Here, he whispered, guiding Hodder's aim, "Let me help you honor Baldur too." The silence that followed the shot was louder than any scream. Baldur fell, his light extinguished instantly, and Asgard's golden halls turned grey with grief. Even the gods, who'd weathered countless battles, found themselves paralyzed not just by loss, but by the unthinkable violation of the natural order. Baldur wasn't supposed to die, not like this, not ever. What followed was a funeral unlike any other. They built a ship so massive it could only be launched by a giantess's push, stacked it with treasures and sacrifices, and set it ablaze on the water. But the true tragedy lay in Frigg's next plea. She sent Hermod, the swiftest of the gods, racing down the helix of Yggdrasil to Hell's frozen gates, begging for Baldur's release. The Queen of the Dead offered a cruel bargain. If every being in the 9 realms wept for him, he could return, and they did, all but one. Loki, disguised as a giantess named Thok, refused. "Let Hell keep what she holds," he sneered, sealing Baldur's fate. This myth isn't just about death. It's about the fragility of even divine plans. Frigg's exhaustive efforts to cheat fate only made Baldur's demise more inevitable, a paradox that haunts every parent's worst fears. Loki's role cuts deeper than mischief. It's a calculated strike at the heart of the gods' illusions of control. The Norse universe had always been a balance of order and chaos, but Baldur's death proved that no amount of power could tilt those scales permanently. Perhaps most devastating is the coda. Odin, the all-seeing, knew Baldur's fate long before it happened, yet even he couldn't prevent it. That's the brutal honesty of Norse mythology. Prophecy doesn't exist to be changed. It exists to remind gods and mortals alike that some darknesses are coming, no matter how bright your light. Baldur's story ends not with resurrection but with quiet acceptance. He'll return only after Ragnarok, when the world is made new. Until then, the gods must live with the hollow space where his laughter used to be, a lesson etched in fire and mistletoe. Not even the divine can outrun the night. Hercules stood at the crossroads of guilt and glory, his hands still stained with the blood of his wife and children. The madness Hera sent had lifted, leaving only the horror of what he'd done. To the Greeks, no crime was worse than kinslaying, and even a demigod couldn't outrun that sin without paying a price. So when the oracle told him to serve King Eurystheus for 12 years, completing whatever labors the cowardly king devised, it wasn't just punishment, it was purification. Each task would be a thread to weave his shattered honor back together, no matter how impossible they seemed. Take the Cyrenian hind, a creature so swift its hooves barely touched the earth. Golden-antlered and sacred to Artemis, it wasn't just about catching it. Hercules had to bring it back alive without a scratch. For a year, he chased the hind across Greece, through valleys and over mountains until he finally cornered it by a river. But here's the twist. When Artemis appeared, furious at the trespass, Hercules didn't fight. He knelt, explaining his penance, and the goddess, moved by his honesty, let him borrow the hind on one condition: he'd return it unharmed. This labor wasn't about strength, it was about humility, a lesson Eurystheus never intended to teach. Then there were the Orjon stables, a task designed to break Hercules' spirit. Centuries of filth from thousands of cattle had turned King Orgeus' stables into a cesspool that poisoned the land. Eurystheus smirked when he ordered Hercules to clean them in a single day until the demigod did the unthinkable. Instead of shoveling, he rerouted 2 rivers, using their currents to scour the stables spotless. It was genius, but Eurystheus refused to count it as a labor. Why? Because Hercules had bargained for payment. The king's pettiness revealed the truth. These labors weren't just tests of might. They were traps designed to make Hercules fail no matter how he succeeded. The lesser-known labors peel back layers of Greek values. The belt of Hippolyta wasn't just a trophy, it was a clash of cultures where Hercules' violence against the Amazons exposed the brutality beneath heroic reputations. The apples of the Hesperides forced him to confront Atlas, holding the sky on his shoulders while the Titan retrieved them, a cosmic game of trust. Even the Erymanthian boar, a beast so massive it buried villages in snow, became a lesson in restraint when Hercules carried it gently to Eurystheus, who hid in a jar at the site. What makes these stories endure isn't just the spectacle, it's the subtext. Hercules' labors were never just about monsters. They were about a man wrestling with his own nature, proving that even the strongest could be brought low, and that redemption wasn't won in a day. The Greeks didn't want flawless heroes. They wanted ones who bled, who faltered, who carried the weight of their mistakes and still found a way to shoulder the world. Hercules didn't just complete 12 labors. He survived them, emerging not as a perfect champion, but as something far more human, a reminder that even the mightiest among us can rebuild from ruin. The strings of Orpheus's lyre could make rivers change course and mountains lean closer to listen. But no melody, no matter how divine, could bring back what the underworld had claimed. His love for Eurydice was the kind that poets fear, too fierce, too pure to survive untouched by tragedy. On their wedding day, she danced barefoot through a sunlit meadow, only to step on a viper hidden in the grass. One bite, and the nymph who'd laughed moments before was nothing but a memory, her soul dragged down to Hades' shadowed halls. Orpheus didn't mourn like ordinary men. He descended into the land of the dead itself, his music softening the hearts of monsters. Even Charon couldn't refuse him passage. When he stood before Hades and Persephone, his song wasn't a demand but a confession of love so vast it defied the natural order. The rulers of the underworld wept black tears. For the first time in history, they offered a bargain. Eurydice could follow him back to the living world, but only if he walked ahead without looking back until they'd both reached the light. Here's where the myth twists like a knife. Orpheus just steps from the surface, his fingers brushing daylight, heard nothing behind him, no footfall, no breath. Was she still there? Had Hades tricked him? In a moment of human frailty, he turned. And there she was, already fading, her hand outstretched as the underworld reclaimed her. This time there would be no second chance. The gate slammed shut between them, her final whisper lost to the dark. What makes this story so devastating isn't just the loss. It's the artistry of the punishment. The gods didn't strike Orpheus down. They let him live with the knowledge that he doomed his own happiness. He wandered the earth after that, singing dirges so sorrowful even animals tore at their own flesh to escape the sound. When Maenads finally tore him apart in a frenzy, his severed head kept singing as it floated down the river, still calling for Eurydice. This myth echoes through centuries for a reason. It asks us, could we have resisted that glance? Would trust have been stronger than doubt? Artists from Monteverdi to Cocteau have wrestled with these questions, composing operas and films where the ending changes because we still crave a world where love conquers all. But the Greeks knew better. Orpheus's tragedy reminds us that some rules, even the cruelest ones, can't be broken by talent or passion. The underworld always collects its due. And sometimes the most haunting melodies are the ones that end unfinished. The wedding should have been a celebration, an alliance between gods and mortals sealed with wine and blessings. But when Eris, the goddess of discord, wasn't invited, she carved her name into history with a single act, tossing a golden apple inscribed with "For the fairest" onto the banquet table. She ignited a vanity too deep for even the Olympians to resist. Hera's eyes narrowed, Athena's fingers twitched toward her spear, Aphrodite's smile turned razor-sharp. Suddenly, the fate of nations hinged on the judgment of a shepherd prince who didn't yet know his own name. Paris, raised among the flocks of Mount Ida, had no idea he was a prince of Troy, let alone the pawn in a divine game. When Hermes led the three goddesses to his hillside, their demand was simple: choose which of them deserved the apple. But nothing is simple when gods are involved. Hera offered empires, rule all Asia with my blessing. Athena promised invincibility, no army could stand against you. Aphrodite, ever the tactician, whispered of love, the most beautiful woman in the world will be yours. What's chilling isn't Paris's choice, but what it reveals about power. The goddesses weren't just appealing to his desires, they were testing the weight of mortal weakness. Hera's offer was political, Athena's martial, but Aphrodite understood the heart's hunger. When Paris handed her the apple, he didn't just pick passion over wisdom or dominion, he exposed the fragility of human judgment. That golden fruit was more than a prize. It was the first domino in a chain that would topple Troy. The fallout was catastrophic. Helen, already wed to Menelaus of Sparta, became the most beautiful woman promised to Paris. Her abduction wasn't just a love story, it was a divine setup, a pretext for war. Agamemnon rallied the Greeks not for justice but for pride, using his brother's shame as an excuse to sack a rival city. Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax all would bleed for a conflict born from wounded vanity. Even the gods took sides, manipulating battles like children burning ants with a magnifying glass. This myth cuts deeper than a cautionary tale about beauty contests. It's a mirror held up to the pettiness of the divine and the recklessness of mortals. Paris's choice wasn't naive, it was human. The goddesses' rivalry wasn't majestic, it was petty, and the Trojan War not an epic but a tragedy spun from ego. The Greeks didn't glorify this story, they shuddered at it, because the judgment of Paris wasn't about who was fairest. It was about how easily the world burns when gods act like spoiled children and mortals dare to play their games. Deep beneath the palace of Knossos, where torchlight flickered against walls painted with bull-leaping dancers, something far more monstrous waited. The labyrinth wasn't just a maze, it was a living nightmare, its corridors shifting like the coils of a serpent, designed by Daedalus himself to be inescapable. And at its heart, the Minotaur raged, half man, half bull, born from Queen Pasiphae's cursed desire and fed on the flesh of Athenian youths. For years, King Minos demanded this gruesome tribute, 7 boys and 7 girls sent every 9 years to sate the beast's hunger. Until one prince refused to let his people be slaughtered. Theseus volunteered as tribute, but his plan wasn't just bravery, it was betrayal. Because before he even stepped onto Cretan soil, Princess Ariadne had already fallen for him. The daughter of Minos, raised in the shadow of her family's shame, handed Theseus 2 gifts, a sword to kill the Minotaur and a simple ball of thread. As he ventured into the labyrinth, unspooling the thread behind him, Ariadne's ingenuity became his lifeline. What's often forgotten is that this wasn't just a love story, it was an act of rebellion. By helping Theseus, Ariadne wasn't just betraying her father's cruelty, she was dismantling the very system that had turned her mother into a laughingstock and her half-brother into a monster. Daedalus, the architect of the labyrinth, had designed it as a prison for the Minotaur, but also as a cage for Minos' secrets. The real genius of the maze wasn't its complexity, it was its symbolism. Twisting passages mirrored the twisted morals of a kingdom that hid its shame underground. When Theseus finally faced the Minotaur, the battle wasn't just between man and beast. It was between the natural order and the grotesque consequences of defying it. The Minotaur didn't choose its fate, it was created by gods and kings playing with forces they didn't understand. Archaeology whispers that this myth might hide slivers of truth. The sprawling ruins of Knossos, with their frescoes of bulls and double-axe motifs, suggest a culture obsessed with bovine power. Some scholars argue the labyrinth was inspired by the palace's labyrinthine layout over 1,000 interconnected rooms across 5 stories. Others point to evidence of ritual bull leaping, where acrobats literally vaulted over charging bulls, turning sacred violence into spectacle. The most chilling theory, that the Minotaur legend preserves a fragmented memory of actual human sacrifice bones found in Cretan caves, show marks consistent with ritual dismemberment. What lingers after Theseus's victory is the cost. Ariadne, abandoned on Naxos, became yet another casualty of heroes who take what they need and move on. Daedalus, whose genius built the labyrinth, would later engineer his own escape from Crete with waxen wings, only to lose his son Icarus to the same sun that once blessed these halls. And the Minotaur, its death didn't end the cycle, it just proved that monsters aren't born, they're made by gods and kings and the choices we refuse to question. The labyrinth still exists in a way, not as stone and shadow but as a warning. The real maze is the one we build when we hide our shame instead of facing it. Daedalus built wings to escape, but he also built a warning, one his son would ignore. The great craftsman knew the rules: wax melts, feathers scatter, and the sun shows no mercy. Yet as he strapped the wings onto Icarus's shoulders on that Cretan cliffside, no amount of fatherly wisdom could compete with the seduction of open sky. The moment Icarus leapt, he wasn't just defying gravity, he was challenging the very boundaries the gods had drawn between earth and heaven. At first, Daedalus's plan worked perfectly. Their wings, crafted from feathers and wax, caught the sea breeze as they soared over the wine-dark Aegean. The old inventor kept to the middle path, careful not to dip too close to the salt spray or climb too near the sun's glare. But Icarus, he laughed as the wind rushed past, drunk on the thrill of flight. With every beat of his wings, he rose higher, chasing the heat of the sun like a moth to flame. The higher he climbed, the more the wax softened. One feather slipped loose, then another. By the time Icarus realized his mistake, the sky itself was pulling him apart. The fall wasn't instant. For one terrible moment, he hung suspended, feathers spiraling away as the wax ran like tears down his arms. Then the sea rose to meet him. Daedalus, turning at his son's scream, could only watch as the waves closed over that bright, broken body. The myth doesn't describe his grief, it doesn't need to. You can hear it in the name we still give to that stretch of water, the Icarian Sea, a grave marked only by drifting feathers. Artists have obsessed over this moment for centuries. Rugel's landscape with the fall of Icarus shows the world indifferent to tragedy. A plowman barely glances up as legs vanish beneath the waves. Matisse's cutouts turn the fall into something almost beautiful, all swirling blues and gold. But perhaps the most haunting interpretation is Antonio Canova's sculpture, where Daedalus cradles his son's limp body, wings still strapped to shoulders that will never lift again. Each rendition asks the same question: was Icarus reckless or was he radiant? Because here's the uncomfortable truth the myth forces us to confront: without Icarus's fatal flight, would we even remember Daedalus? The inventor's cautious middle path kept him alive, but it didn't make him legendary. Humanity's greatest leaps have always been taken by those who risked burning their wings. The Wright brothers, the astronauts of Apollo 11, even the architects of flight, they all shared a spark of Icarus's audacity. The difference, they calculated the melting point of their wax. This isn't just a story about disobedience, it's about the razor's edge between ambition and hubris. Daedalus represents the wisdom of limits, the safety of knowing when to stop. Icarus embodies the price of ignoring them, yet the myth lingers because we see ourselves in both characters, the part that fears the fall and the part that secretly yearns to touch the sun. Every time we push beyond what's deemed possible, we're replaying that ancient choice: fly cautiously or risk everything for a moment of glory. The sea is always waiting. But so is the sky. The earth was young and golden when Persephone first slipped away from her mother's watchful gaze. One moment she was gathering flowers in a Sicilian meadow, narcissus blooms so bright they seemed to drink the sunlight. The next the ground split open with a roar, and Hades himself erupted from the chasm in a chariot of blackened gold. His hands, colder than winter rivers, closed around Persephone's wrists as he dragged her into the abyss. By the time Demeter heard her daughter's fading scream, the earth had sealed itself shut, leaving no trace but trampled petals. Demeter's grief didn't just weep, it raged. The goddess of the harvest cast aside her duties, letting fields wither to dust and trees shed their fruit like rotten tears. Mortals starved, temples stood empty. Even the Olympians trembled as famine clawed at the world, for without Demeter's blessing, the earth itself became a tomb. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Persephone's despair took root differently. She refused all food, all comfort, until a sly gardener, some say Hades in disguise, offered her 6 pomegranate seeds. Their ruby juice stained her lips as she ate, a small, fatal mistake. Zeus, pressured by the cries of dying mortals, finally intervened. He decreed Persephone could return to the surface, but only for 6 months each year, one for every seed swallowed. And so the seasons turned. When Persephone ascends, Demeter's joy paints the world in green and gold. When she descends, winter grips the land in her mother's mourning. But there's a deeper layer to this myth, whispered only in torch-lit caves at Eleusis. The Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites celebrated for over 2,000 years, promised initiates a revelation about life, death, and what lies beyond. Scholars still debate what exactly transpired in those hallowed halls, perhaps a reenactment of Persephone's journey, or a vision of the afterlife, but all agree. Those who witnessed it emerged unshaken, their fear of death dissolved like morning mist. This isn't just a tale about seasons, it's about the balance between light and dark, the inevitability of loss, and the fragile hope of return. Persephone's dual role as spring's maiden and underworld queen mirrors life's own cycles. The Greeks didn't see her abduction as mere tragedy, but as a necessary division, the price paid for both harvests and rebirth. Even Hades, often cast as villain, becomes more complex when you consider his loneliness in that lightless realm. He didn't just steal Persephone, he needed her just as the earth needs winter to make way for spring. The pomegranate seeds linger as the myth's most ingenious detail. 6 tiny concessions, 6 months of reprieve, proof that even in the darkest myths, the ancients wove a thread of compromise. Persephone's story endures because it refuses neat endings. Like the mysteries at Eleusis, it offers no easy answers, only the quiet understanding that some losses aren't permanent, and some loves are worth the waiting. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the air hummed with the scent of laurel and sulfur, the earth itself once spoke. Long before Apollo claimed Delphi as his sacred oracle, the site belonged to Python, a primordial serpent that slithered from the mud of Gaia's wrath. Its coils wrapped around the mountain like a vice, whispering prophecies in the hiss of steam rising from fissures in the rock. But when Apollo, the golden god of light, came seeking a throne for his divine voice, he didn't ask for permission. His arrows found Python's heart, and the serpent's death throes were so violent they cracked the temple floor beneath Delphi. Yet even in victory, Apollo couldn't silence Python entirely. Some say the creature's spirit still stirs in the toxic vapors that seep from the stones, lending its voice to the oracle who would take its name, the Pythia. Becoming the Pythia wasn't a blessing, it was a possession. Chosen from Delphi's peasant women for her purity or perhaps her vulnerability, she'd descend into the temple's inner sanctum, the Aditon, where cracks in the earth exhaled ethylene and methane. Seated on a tripod above the fumes, she'd chew laurel leaves, her body convulsing as the gases blurred the line between mortal and divine. What emerged wasn't poetry, but raw, guttural sounds, a language of barks and groans that priests would translate into verse for petitioners. Kings and beggars alike knelt before her, desperate for glimpses of fate, though the answers often curled like smoke. ambiguous, twisting, designed to survive scrutiny no matter the outcome. Take Croesus, the wealthiest king of Lydia, who asked if he should wage war on Persia. The Pythia replied, "If you cross the Halys River, a great empire will fall." He did, and it was his own, or the Athenian general Themistocles, who was told to trust wooden walls against the Persian invasion. Most assumed this meant the city's palisades. Themistocles gambled it meant ships, and his navy's victory at Salamis changed history. The oracle's genius lay in this very vagueness, a survival tactic as much as divine mystery. But Delphi's true power wasn't just prophecy, it was politics. The temple amassed fortunes in gold, its priests brokering alliances and blackmailing city-states with carefully curated, divine advice. When Sparta demanded guidance on invading Athens, the Pythia's response conveniently aligned with Delphi's financial ties to Sparta's enemies. Even the temple's motto, "Know thyself," was less spiritual counsel than a warning. Remember your place in the gods' games. The eerie brilliance of Delphi was how it threaded the supernatural with the ruthlessly practical. The Pythia's trances were real modern science, confirms the Aditon's gases induced hallucinations, but the interpretations were human, shaped by bribes, threats, and the era's shifting powers. Apollo might have slain Python, but the serpent's legacy lived on in every veiled prophecy, every calculated miracle. For centuries, Delphi reminded mortals that the gods speak, but it's always men who decide what the words mean. And in that space between divinity and deception, empires rose and fell on the echoes of a poisoned whisper. Gilgamesh's laughter once shook the walls of Uruk, his arrogance as boundless as his strength. He was a king carved from divinity, 2/3 god, 1/3 man, yet no amount of power could shield him from the truth that arrived with Enkidu's last breath. The wild man, once his enemy, then his dearest friend, lay lifeless in his arms, and for the first time Gilgamesh understood what it meant to be mortal. The epic doesn't describe his grief in whispers. It roars with the sound of a man tearing his hair, clawing at his face, refusing to let Enkidu's body be buried for 7 days until worms fell from the nostrils. This wasn't mourning, it was rebellion. If death could take Enkidu, it could take him too, and so Gilgamesh, the man who'd never known fear, ran, not toward battle but away from the one enemy he couldn't defeat. His journey led him to the ends of the earth, across poisoned rivers and through caverns where the sun never touched. He sought Utnapishtim, the only mortal the gods had granted eternal life. The old man's tale was one Gilgamesh didn't expect, a story of wrath and water. Long ago, the gods sent a flood to wipe out humanity, but Utnapishtim, warned by the trickster god built an ark and saved his family and every species of animal. Sound familiar? This Mesopotamian flood myth predates the biblical story of Noah by centuries, yet the echoes are uncanny: divine judgment, a chosen survivor, a bird sent to find dry land. But here's the twist: Utnapishtim didn't earn immortality through virtue. The gods granted it on a whim, a capricious reward they'd never repeat. Gilgamesh's desperation sharpened. If Utnapishtim could cheat death, so could he. The old man tested him first: stay awake for 7 days. Gilgamesh failed before sunset, exhausted by his own grief. Then came a final offer, a plant from the seabed that could restore youth. He dove deep, retrieved it, only to have it stolen by a serpent while he slept. The irony was bitter. The gods dangled immortality just beyond his grasp, not out of malice, but to teach a lesson even kings must learn. Life's value lies in its finiteness. What makes this 4,000-year-old epic so timeless isn't just its stunning parallels to later myths. It's Gilgamesh's transformation. He returns to Uruk empty-handed but changed. His hands no longer clenched in defiance but open to the beauty of his city's walls, the joy of a cool breeze, the love he once took for granted. The first hero in recorded literature doesn't conquer death. He conquers his fear of it, and in doing so, he becomes something greater than an immortal, a man who truly lives. Ishtar set her sights on the underworld not out of curiosity but conquest. The goddess of love and war, radiant in her jewels and arrogance, believed no realm, not even the land of the dead, could resist her sway. But the underworld wasn't Uruk's glittering temples or Babylon's pleasure gardens. Here, dust coated the air like a second skin, and the only light came from the faint glow of torches held by skeletal hands. At each of the 7 gates, the queen of the dead, Ereshkigal, forced Ishtar to shed a piece of her divinity, her crown, her earrings, her robe, until by the final gate she stood naked and shivering, stripped not just of adornments but of power. Ereshkigal's vengeance was slow and precise. She hung Ishtar's lifeless body from a hook, letting it rot alongside the other forgotten souls, but the underworld's cruelty had unintended consequences. With Ishtar imprisoned, the earth above withered. Bulls refused to mate, crops crumbled to ash, and human desire itself seemed to evaporate. The gods, who'd tolerated Ishtar's vanity, now panicked without her presence. Life itself was unraveling. Even the dead suffered, as no new souls arrived to replenish the underworld's halls. The solution came from E, god of wisdom, who crafted a loophole in cosmic law. He created a Sashanamir, a being neither male nor female, whose beauty could charm even Ereshkigal's stone heart. When the queen of the dead let her guard down long enough to grant a boon, a Sashanamir demanded Ishtar's release. Ereshkigal's rage shook the underworld's foundations. She cursed a Sashanamir to be forever hated by mortals, the first scapegoat for humanity's prejudices. But the deal held. Ishtar was revived, bathed in the waters of life, and permitted to leave on one condition. For every step she took toward the surface, a hostage from the living world would take her place in the dark. This myth isn't just about a goddess's humiliation. It's a stark lesson in balance. Ishtar's descent disrupted the delicate equilibrium between life and death, fertility and decay. Her return didn't erase the cost, it merely redistributed it. The hostages she traded, Tammuz, her own lover, among them, would spend half each year in the underworld, explaining the Mesopotamian cycle of barren winters and fertile springs. Even more fascinating is a Sashanamir's role, a rare gender-fluid figure in ancient myth, whose very existence became a divine punishment. The story forces us to ask who truly holds power. The goddess who storms the gates of hell, or the one who rules there? The answer, like the underworld itself, is full of shadows. Ishtar's tale endures because it refuses to romanticize the divine. Here, gods aren't wise rulers but chaotic forces, their squabbles dictating whether mortals feast or starve. Ereshkigal isn't a villain, she's the unyielding guardian of the natural order, punishing those who think themselves exempt from its laws. And Ishtar, she learns but never fully repents. Even in revival, she carries the underworld's stench on her skin, a reminder that no one, not even a goddess, conquers death without leaving something precious behind. Before time had a name, the universe was nothing but swirling chaos, saltwater and fresh water tangled together in the form of Tiamat, the primordial dragon of the sea. Her consort Apsu, the god of sweet waters, grew weary of their noisy offspring, the younger gods whose celebrations shook the void. "Let us destroy them," Apsu whispered, little knowing his own children would overhear. The plot sparked the first divine rebellion. E, god of wisdom, struck first, murdering Apsu in his sleep and claiming his watery domain. But Tiamat, once a nurturing force, became something far more terrifying, a mother's rage given teeth and scale. She birthed an army of monsters, horned serpents with venom for blood, scorpion men whose gaze turned flesh to stone, and her new consort Kingu, to whom she entrusted the tablets of destiny. The cosmos trembled on the brink of annihilation. Enter Marduk, E's son, a storm god so radiant even the other gods recoiled from his light. They struck a desperate bargain. If Marduk could defeat Tiamat, they'd crown him king of all deities. Armed with winds as weapons and riding a chariot pulled by 4 hurricane demons, Marduk faced Tiamat in a battle that would rewrite reality itself. The dragon roared, her maw wide enough to swallow stars, but Marduk hurled a tempest down her throat, bloating her body until she couldn't close her jaws. Then with a single spear thrust, he split her skull like overripe fruit. What happened next wasn't just victory, it was creation. Marduk tore Tiamat's corpse like parchment, using one half to arch the heavens and the other to cradle the earth. Her saliva became clouds, her ribs the mountains, her eyes the twin sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Kingu's blood mixed with clay to form the first humans, destined to serve the gods forever. This wasn't just a myth, it was Babylon's political manifesto. By casting Marduk as the universe's architect, the Enuma Elish justified Babylon's rise to power, framing its dominance as divinely ordained. Compare this to other creation stories and the contrasts are staggering. Unlike the Norse Ymir, whose death was a necessary sacrifice, Tiamat's slaughter feels like an act of brutal conquest. The Greeks told of Gaia birthing the world peacefully, while Egyptian myths described Autumn willing himself into existence with a thought. But the Enuma Elish stands apart. Its creation is born from violence, order hammered from chaos through war. Even humanity's origin is startlingly pragmatic. We're not molded from love like in some myths, but fashioned as laborers from a traitor's blood. Yet traces of this Babylonian epic echo everywhere. The struggle between storm god and dragon mirrors, Zeus battling Typhon or Indra slaying Vritra. The flood myth woven into Gilgamesh's saga appears here first, with E warning Utnapishtim. Most haunting is the fate of Tiamat herself, once the womb of all life, reduced to scaffolding for a world that would forget her name. Her story whispers a dark truth: creation isn't always kind. Sometimes the world begins not with a whisper but with a scream. The desert wind carried more than sand, it carried whispers from the house of the dead. Anubis waited there, his jackal ears tuned to the sound of approaching souls. This wasn't just the god of death. This was the first embalmer, the guardian of scales, the divine outcast whose very existence was a secret. Because Anubis shouldn't have been born at all, his mother Nephthys, trapped in a loveless marriage to Set, disguised herself as her sister Isis to seduce Osiris. From that deception came a jackal-headed child, hastily hidden in the marshes to avoid Set's wrath. Yet destiny has a way of unearthing what's buried. When Osiris was murdered and dismembered by Set, it was Anubis, the abandoned son, who reconstructed the first mummy, preserving his father's body with linen and resin, inventing the rituals that would define Egyptian immortality. Mummification wasn't just preservation, it was transformation. Anubis's priests, their heads shaved and robes gleaming, worked for 70 days to turn a corpse into a vessel for the afterlife. They removed organs with obsidian blades, storing lungs, liver, and stomach in canopic jars guarded by gods. The brain, deemed unimportant, was pulled through the nose with hooks and discarded, yet the heart stayed untouched. Because the heart wasn't just an organ, it was the ledger of a lifetime, the only thing Anubis would weigh against the feather of Mat in the Hall of Judgment. Picture that moment, the newly dead standing before the scales, their fate balanced on a golden plate. 42 assessor gods watched as Anubis adjusted the balance, his black snout sniffing for deceit. If the heart was heavier than the feather, stained with lies or cruelty, it was devoured by Ammit, a nightmare hybrid of lion, hippo, and crocodile. But if the scales balanced, the soul earned passage to the field of reeds, where barley grew taller than men and death was just another sunrise. What's striking isn't the judgment itself, but who presided over it. Anubis, the illegitimate child, became the arbiter of divine justice. His jackal form wasn't arbitrary. Egyptians saw these scavengers prowling cemeteries, protecting the dead from disturbance. He wasn't feared like Set or revered like Osiris. He was necessary, a god who did the messy, sacred work others avoided. Even his signature color, obsidian black, symbolized not decay, but the fertile Nile silt that brought life from death. Modern excavations reveal how deeply this ritual permeated Egyptian life. Tomb paintings show Anubis cradling pharaohs like a mother. Papyri details spells to fool the scales, proving humanity's timeless itch to cheat death. But the most poignant relic isn't gold or hieroglyphs, it's a mummified child, carefully wrapped with an amulet over its heart, tucked into eternity by priests who believed Anubis would carry even the smallest soul gently into the dark. The throne of Egypt hung in the balance for 80 years, not through diplomacy but through blood and betrayal. When Osiris was murdered by his brother Set, the question of succession became a battleground literally. On one side stood Horus, the falcon-headed son of Osiris, rightful heir but barely more than a child when the feud began. On the other loomed Set, god of storms and chaos, his forked tail lashing as he claimed the throne by force. The Aeneid, Egypt's divine council, hesitated to judge. So began the longest divine trial in history, where justice wasn't decided by arguments, but by brutal tests of strength and cunning. Set's first challenge was a perversion of sport, a stone ship race across the Nile. While Horus crafted a wooden boat, Set cheated, carving his vessel from a mountain's peak so it sank like an anchor. But Horus, learning from his mother Isis's trickery, built a papyrus raft painted to look like stone. When Set's ship plunged, Horus floated to victory. The gods applauded until Set demanded a rematch, this time in the form of a hippopotamus battle beneath the floodwaters. For 3 months, the two gods wrestled as beasts, their roars churning the Nile to froth. Horus nearly drowned Set, only to relent when the other gods cried mercy, a mistake that would cost him dearly. Isis, watching from the reeds, knew Set would never yield to fairness. So she set a trap only a mother could devise. Disguising herself as a grieving widow, she lured Set into admitting his crimes. Osiris's throne is mine by right, he boasted, not realizing the woman's eyes burned with divine fire. When Isis revealed herself, even the sun god Ra flinched, but Set, ever defiant, turned the tables. A son who hides behind his mother's skirts is no king. He roared and the council wavered. The final test was the cruelest. Set proposed they each impregnate the other and see whose seed could sire a child proof of dominance. Through magic, Horus tricked Set into drinking his semen while secretly collecting Set's own in a jar. When Thoth, the god of wisdom, examined the evidence, he found Set's seed floating harmlessly in the marsh while Horus's essence burned inside Set's belly like acid. The verdict seemed clear, yet still Ra hesitated. Why? Because Set was chaos incarnate, and even gods feared what might happen if he was stripped of power entirely. In the end, it took more than trials, it took mutilation. During one brutal clash, Set tore out Horus's left eye, the lunar eye, shattering it into 64 fragments. Thoth later restored it, but the damage was done. The message was etched in divine flesh. Some wounds never fully heal. Horus, in turn, emasculated Set, ensuring the storm god's legacy would end with him. The resolution came not from victory, but exhaustion. After 80 years of battles, betrayals, and the silent weariness of gods tired of war, Horus was crowned. But Egypt's duality remained. Horus ruled the fertile Black Land, while Set was exiled to the barren Red Land. Neither triumphed completely, neither was erased. Because the Egyptians understood what modern courts often forget. Justice isn't about erasing darkness, it's about balance. The contendings don't glorify winners or vilify losers. They reveal a truth as old as the Nile: power is never given. It's taken, and sometimes the price is paid not in gold, but in blood and time and pieces of yourself you can never get back. Deep beneath the shifting sands of Memphis, buried where the Nile's whispers couldn't reach, lay a secret not meant for mortal hands, the Book of Thoth. This wasn't just a scroll, it was the god of wisdom's own knowledge etched in hieroglyphs that pulsed with power, promising mastery over language, beasts, and even the stars. But Thoth hadn't left it unprotected. The book rested in a golden box within a silver box within an ivory box, each sealed with scorpions that answered to the moon's phases. No priest, no pharaoh, no living soul had breached its prison until Prince Neferkaptah, scholar, warrior, and heir to Egypt's throne, decided the rules didn't apply to him. Neferkaptah's obsession began with a rumor, a scribe's drunken boast about a text that could make demons kneel and the dead speak in daylight. What started as curiosity curdled into fixation. He sacrificed to Thoth for months, begging for guidance, but the god remained silent. So the prince turned to darker methods. He tracked the book's location to a temple crypt guarded by serpents that moved like shadows. Here's where the myth chills. Neferkaptah didn't fight the creatures. He outsmarted them. Using wax figurines and spells from lesser grimoires, he paralyzed the serpents long enough to seize the nested boxes. When the final seal broke, the air itself seemed to recoil. The book's first line was a warning. To read me is to own me, and to own me is to lose all you love. He ignored it. Neferkaptah's newfound power was immediate. He recited a single passage and saw the heavens rearrange, another, and crocodiles bowed like supplicants. But the book exacted its price in increments. First, his son drowned in the Nile not by accident, but by an unseen force that dragged him under mid-laughter. Then his wife, clawing at her own throat, succumbed to a phantom scorpion sting. By the time Neferkaptah himself plunged into the river with the book chained to his chest, he'd gone mad from grief, scribbling protective spells on his own skin. Their ghosts haunted the waters for centuries, warning sailors of the family's drowned tomb. What makes this legend so compelling isn't just the tragedy, it's the eerie parallels to real Egyptian magic. Archaeologists have uncovered grimoires like the actual Book of the Dead, filled with spells to navigate the afterlife, but the Book of Thoth represents something rawer, the peril of forbidden knowledge. Priests performed rituals to temporarily borrow divine wisdom, always returning it like a borrowed tool. Neferkaptah's sin wasn't theft, it was the arrogance of thinking he could keep what belonged to the gods. Modern excavations near Saqqara have revealed tombs with curse inscriptions mirroring the prince's fate, suggesting such warnings weren't mere fiction. Even the nesting boxes find echoes in real priestly practices, sacred texts often stored in layered shrines to deter the unworthy. The darkest irony, some scholars believe Neferkaptah may have been real, a lesser documented prince whose death inspired cautionary tales. Whether fact or folklore, his story endures as a visceral reminder. Not all doors are meant to be opened, and some knowledge burns the hands that hold it. Ra had grown weary not just of ruling, but of the very creatures he'd sculpted from his own tears. Humanity, once beloved, had become a buzzing hive of ingratitude, mocking his aging body and plotting rebellion in the shadows. The sun god's patience, like the Nile in drought, had run dry. Summoning the eye of Ra, the furious aspect of his divine power, he unleashed it upon the earth in the form of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess whose roar could shatter mountains. Her name meant the powerful one, but in those crimson days she earned another title, the bringer of slaughter. Sekhmet's rampage began at dawn. Her claws tore through villages like parchment, her jaws snapping spines as easily as twigs. The Nile didn't run red from silt, it choked on blood. The gods watched in horror as she escalated from punishment to obsession, her hunger growing with every kill. What started as justice spiraled into genocide. Even Ra, who'd ordered the purge, shuddered at her gleeful butchery, but halting her was impossible. Sekhmet, drunk on violence, no longer answered to anyone's will, not even her creator's. Desperate, Ra turned to the only force clever enough to outwit destruction: intoxication. He ordered the earth's finest beer dyed with pomegranate and hibiscus until it mirrored the hue of human blood, then poured 7,000 jugs across Sekhmet's path at sunset. When the lioness goddess stumbled upon the pool, she didn't hesitate. She lapped at the liquid, thinking it fresh prey. The beer, laced with mandrake and poppy, hit her like a sandstorm. Her snarls softened to purrs, her steps faltered. By midnight, she lay sprawled in a drunken daze, her rage dissolved into stupor. When she awoke, the bloodlust had burned away, leaving only Hathor, the gentler aspect of the eye, goddess of music and motherhood. Civilization was saved, but the cost lingered in the collective memory of Egypt. This myth isn't just about divine wrath, it's a cautionary tale about the limits of power. Ra's lesson wasn't that humanity deserved mercy, it was that destruction, once unleashed, is harder to control than a flooded river. Sekhmet's transformation reveals an uncomfortable truth. Violence has its own appetite, one that often outgrows the reasons it was summoned. And the bear trick, it's a stroke of dark comedy, yes, but also a profound metaphor. Sometimes salvation isn't found in force, but in subterfuge, in the willingness to meet madness with creativity. The Egyptians memorialized this near annihilation in their New Year's festivals, where they drank dyed beer to honor the thin line between order and chaos. Even Sekhmet statues carried dual meanings. Warriors prayed to her for protection in battle, while mothers begged her to spare their children's lives. That duality is the heart of the story. The same force that almost erased mankind became their guardian, a reminder that the gods, like humanity, contain multitudes. Rage and mercy, destruction and renewal, these aren't opposites. They're currents in the same river, and we're all just trying not to drown. Before land, before light, there was only the swirling brine of chaos until two gods stirred it with a jeweled spear. Izanagi and Izanami, the divine couple, stood on the floating bridge of heaven, gazing into the abyss below. When they dipped their spear, the drops that fell from its tip congealed into the first island, Onagoro. Stepping onto this newborn earth, they performed a ritual as old as time itself, circling a pillar, male to the left, female to the right. When they met on the other side, Izanami spoke first, a breach of protocol that would echo through eternity. Their union bore horrors, leached children, islands of smoke. Only when they repeated the ritual correctly did Izanami give birth to the 8 perfect islands of Japan, their shorelines cradled in the palm of the sea. But creation demands sacrifice. When Izanami labored to bring forth Kagetsuchi, the fire god, his searing arrival scorched her womb. As she lay dying, her vomit became the gods of metal, her urine the goddess of water, her final breath the god of wind. The earth itself seemed to mourn, rivers boiled, mountains cracked open like eggshells. Izanagi's grief was a tempest. He drew his sword and sliced Kagetsuchi into 8 pieces, each fragment erupting into a new volcano. Yet no act of vengeance could fill the void she left, so he did the unthinkable. He descended to Yomi, the land of the dead, to retrieve her. The underworld wasn't a place, it was a presence. The air clung thick with decay, the only light seeping from faint patches of luminescent mold. Izanagi found Izanami waiting behind a great rock, her form half-shrouded in shadow. "You came too soon," she whispered. "I have eaten the food of Yomi." A shudder ran through him. Those who consumed the underworld's fare could never return. Yet when he lit a torch to see her fully, the horror unfolded. Her once radiant skin hung in putrid strips, writhing with maggots. The goddess who'd shaped islands now resembled a corpse left too long in the sun. Terrified, Izanagi fled. Izanami's shriek of betrayal sent the hag like Shikome, the foul women of Yomi, clawing after him. He hurled his headdress, which became grapes they stopped to devour. His comb transformed into bamboo shoots, slowing them further. But when he reached the slope separating Yomi from the living world, Izanami herself pursued, her rotting fingers brushing his heel. Izanagi sealed the passage with a boulder, their final divorce decree shouted through the stone. "Then I shall kill 1,000 of your people each day," she vowed. His reply was icy calm. "Then I shall build 1,500 birthing huts each night." This myth isn't just about love lost, it's about the irreversible line between life and death. Izanagi's purification ritual after escaping Yomi birthed deities from each item he discarded. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, from his left eye, Tsukuyomi, the moon god, from his right, Susanoo, the storm god, from his nose. Even his bathwater spawned lesser kami, proving that in Japanese myth nothing is wasted, not even grief. The tale's layered ironies cut deep. Izanami, creator of life, becomes the mother of death. Izanagi, who dared to look back like Orpheus, emerges not with his love but with the very forces that would shape Japan's spiritual landscape. The most haunting detail isn't the decay or the chase, it's that boulder. To this day, offerings are left at shrines like the one said to mark the entrance to Yomi, a silent plea to keep the boundary intact. The story whispers a truth every culture wrestles with: some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. And the dead, no matter how loved, must never be seen as they truly are. Amaterasu's light had always been constant until the day it wasn't. The sun goddess, weary of her brother Susanoo's endless chaos, watched in horror as he flayed her favorite horse and hurled its corpse through her sacred loom. The violence wasn't just an insult, it was a violation of the order she embodied. Retreating into the Ama Noiwato cave, she sealed the entrance with a boulder, and the world plunged into a darkness deeper than any night. Crops withered, spirits wailed, and demons roamed freely under the cover of perpetual shadow. The gods knew desperation when they saw it. Their solution wasn't brute force but theater. On a scaffold outside the cave, the voluptuous goddess Aim no Uzum overturned a tub and began stamping her feet in a dance so primal it shook the heavens. As her robes slipped, the other 8 million kami roared with laughter, their joy echoing like thunder. Amaterasu, puzzled by the commotion, cracked the boulder open just enough to ask why they celebrated without her. "We've found a goddess more radiant than you," Aim no Uzum lied, gesturing to a mirror they'd hung nearby. When Amaterasu leaned closer, her own reflection, magnified and mystifying, lured her fully out of the cave. A wrestler instantly barred the entrance with a sacred rope, trapping the light where it belonged. This myth isn't just about the sun's return, it's a masterclass in psychological warfare. The gods didn't plead or negotiate, they manipulated Amaterasu's curiosity and vanity, using her own brilliance against her. Aim no Uzum's dance, often reduced to bawdy comedy, was actually a sacred act. The origins of Kagura, ritual performances still done at Shinto shrines today. That mirror, now enshrined at Ai's Grand Shrine as one of Japan's imperial regalia, symbolizes self-reflection's power to reveal truths even deities can't ignore. What's often overlooked is Susanoo's role. His exile after this incident led to his own redemption arc, slaying the serpent Yamata no Orochi and discovering the sword Kusanagi in its tail. The tale's real lesson: even divine harmony requires occasional disruption. Without Susanoo's cruelty, Amaterasu's retreat, and Aim no Uzum's cunning, the world would lack the rhythm of conflict and resolution that makes it whole. The cave wasn't just a hiding place, it was a crucible, proving that light, once lost, must be re-earned through ingenuity and collective will. Susanoo's exile from the heavens left him adrift in the mortal realm, his divine strength stripped of purpose, until he stumbled upon an old couple weeping by a river in Izumo. Their grief had a name: Yamata no Orochi, an 8-headed serpent so vast its bodies blocked valleys, its crimson eyes burning like forged coals. For 7 years, the beast had claimed one of their 8 daughters each season, and now only Princess Kusanagi remained. The storm god, still simmering with resentment from his banishment, saw not just a chance for redemption, but an opportunity to unleash his fury on something deserving. What followed wasn't just a battle, it was a masterstroke of divine cunning. Susanoo transformed Kusanagi into a comb tucked safely in his hair, then set about brewing the strongest sake ever known. He built 8 platforms, each with a vat large enough to drown a man, and filled them to the brim. When Orochi slithered down from the mountains, drawn by the scent, its 8 heads plunged greedily into the liquor. The serpent didn't just drink, It drowned in its own gluttony, the alcohol seeping into its veins like poison. As the beast slumped into a stupor, Susanoo drew his sword and began the gruesome work of dismemberment, each strike sending shockwaves through the earth. The real surprise lay coiled in Orochi's fourth tale. Susanoo's blade clanged against something impossibly hard, a gleam of steel amidst the gore. Kusanagi, the grass-cutting sword, emerged pristine from the carnage, its edge so sharp it could slice wind itself. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a cosmic joke. The serpent that had terrorized mortals for years had been hoarding one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan, an artifact that would later be passed down through emperors and enshrined at Atsuta. The aftermath reveals the tale's deeper layers. Susanoo, the outcast, gifted both Kusanagi and Kushinoda to the grieving parents, rebuilding their home as penance for his past chaos. His victory wasn't just over Orochi, but over his own destructive nature, proving even the wildest storms can bring renewal. Archaeologists still debate whether the serpent myth commemorates an ancient battle against a rival clan, the 8 heads symbolizing warlords, or a literal ritual to appease river spirits. But the takeaway remains timeless. Sometimes the darkest monsters guard the brightest treasures, and the gods themselves must stumble before they learn to shine. A childless old woman knelt by the stream, washing clothes with hands gnarled from decades of labor when the impossible floated toward her, a peach the size of a boulder bobbing lazily on the current. She hauled it home, laughing with her husband at their strange fortune, until the fruit split open with a sound like a summer storm. Inside sat a boy, pink-cheeked and bright-eyed, already bowing as if he'd been expected. "Call me Momotaro," he said, "Peach boy." And from that moment, the elderly couple knew their lives would never be ordinary again. Years later, when news reached their village that marauding Oni, ogres with skin like blue fire and horns curled like sickles, were stealing treasure and terrorizing the coast, Momotaro didn't hesitate. He packed millet dumplings kissed with his mother's tears and set off toward Demon Island. His journey wasn't solitary for long. A dog with a pelt like storm clouds fell into step beside him, lured by the scent of dumplings. "Join me," Momotaro offered, "and I'll share my food." Next came a pheasant, its feathers gleaming like copper coins, then a monkey whose chatter could split rocks. Each ally swallowed a bite of dumpling and pledged loyalty, their animal instincts tempered by the boy's unshakable kindness. The ogre's fortress loomed like a rotten tooth against the horizon, its gates studded with the bones of past challengers. But Momotaro's army fought with more than brute force. The pheasant dive-bombed, pecking at the Oni's eyes. The monkey scrambled up walls to sabotage their weapons. The dog's jaws clamped around ankles, sending giants crashing to their knees. And Momotaro, he marched straight for the Ogre King, his wooden sword a blur, until the terrified brute surrendered his hoard, gold, silk, and a magical mallet that could grant wishes. Yet when Momotaro returned home, his triumph wasn't measured in plunder. It was in the way his parents' wrinkles softened with pride, and how the village learned that even the smallest among them could topple giants if they walked with courage and shared their dumplings. Beneath its folkloric charm, this tale hides sharp cultural truths. The millet dumplings, or kibai dango, weren't just snacks, they symbolized the communal spirit of Japan's agrarian society, where sharing food meant survival. The animal allies reflect the Shinto belief that all creatures possess kami, or divine spirit, worthy of respect. Even the ogres, though monstrous, weren't mindless. Their eventual surrender suggests reconciliation over annihilation, a value deeply rooted in Japanese diplomacy. Modern retellings often sanitize Momotaro's story, but the original edges are telling. Some versions describe the ogres devouring children, making Momotaro's quest one of vengeance as much as justice. Others hint that the peach itself was a gift from the gods, placing the boy in a lineage of divine heroes like Perseus or Moses. What's universally poignant is the ending. Momotaro doesn't ascend to the heavens or claim a throne. He goes home because in Japanese folklore, the greatest quests often lead back to where you began, just a little wiser and with better stories to tell. The wind carried more than dust across the plains of Tolan. It carried whispers of a god walking among mortals. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, wasn't just a deity to the Aztecs. He was civilization itself wrapped in jade and quetzal feathers. His breath stirred the first cornstalks from barren soil. His tears became the morning dew that nourished them. With hands both divine and gentle, he taught humanity the art of the loom, the secrets of the stars, and the sacred calendar that measured time's heartbeat. Under his rule, Tolan became a city of gold and harmony, where no one went hungry and the streets rang with the music of obsidian flutes. But gods, like men, have weaknesses. When Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, sought to topple Quetzalcoatl's reign, he didn't come with armies. He came with a mirror. Holding it up to the feathered serpent, he revealed not a radiant god but a man, aging, flawed, mortal in his loneliness. Then came the pulque, the fermented agave wine Tezcatlipoca offered as solace. Quetzalcoatl drank deeply, and with each cup his divinity unraveled. In a haze of shame, he broke every law he'd ever sworn by, lying with a priestess, abandoning his temples, letting the sacred fires die. The next morning, his face lined with regret, he built a raft of serpents and sailed east, vowing to return one day in a year counted by the reed. This promise would echo catastrophically through history. When Cortez's sails appeared off the coast in 1519, a year counted by the reed in the Aztec calendar, Moctezuma hesitated. Could this pale stranger be Quetzalcoatl returning as foretold? The conquistadors, quick to exploit the myth, wore the coincidence like armor. By the time the Aztecs realized their mistake, Tenochtitlan was already choking on its own blood. Beneath this tragedy lies a chilling irony. The real Quetzalcoatl hadn't just brought corn and culture. He'd abolished human sacrifice, teaching that the gods desired butterflies and flowers instead of hearts. Yet the Aztec priests, fearing the sun would falter without blood, had twisted his legacy. In the end, the feathered serpent's greatest lesson wasn't in his gifts, but in the cost of forgetting them, how easily hope can be weaponized, and how the darkest chapters of history often begin with a story told wrong. Before time was measured in years, the Aztecs believed the universe had already lived and died 4 times over. Each era, called a sun, ended not with a whisper but with apocalyptic fury, not because the gods were cruel, but because creation itself demanded balance. The first sun was devoured by monstrous jaguars that poured from the sky, their teeth shredding the earth until nothing remained but bones and silence. When the second sun dawned, it was the wind gods who brought ruin, their hurricane breath scattering humanity like leaves. Those who survived were turned into monkeys, clinging to trees as the world dissolved around them. Then came the third sun, ruled by the fire god Huhuteotl. His reign ended when volcanic rage painted the sky black, lava swallowing cities whole and transforming the few remaining people into butterflies and birds, creatures light enough to flee the carnage. The fourth sun drowned in a flood so relentless it lasted 52 years, washing away civilizations until only fish remained, their silent mouths opening and closing in the dark waters. But the fifth sun, our sun, was different. It wasn't born from chaos but from sacrifice. The gods gathered at Teotihuacan, knowing this world would need more than divine decree to survive. 2 volunteered to leap into the sacred fire and become the new sun, the proud Tecusistecatl and the humble Nanahuatzin, a sickly god covered in sores. When the moment came, Tecusistecatl hesitated, staring into the flames. Nanahuatzin didn't wait. He threw himself in without looking back, his body igniting into the blazing orb we see today. Shamed, Tecusistecatl followed, becoming the moon paler, weaker, forever chasing his rival across the sky. Yet the sacrifice didn't end there. The newborn sun refused to move without offerings of blood. So the gods cut out their own hearts, fueling its journey with their pain. This wasn't just myth, it was the foundation of Aztec belief. Every sunrise, every act of war, every human sacrifice mirrored that first divine exchange, a reminder that life demands payment in blood, and that the fifth sun, like its predecessors, will one day meet its end in a cataclysm of earthquakes. What makes this creation myth so compelling isn't just the spectacle of destruction. It's the brutal honesty of its message. Existence is cyclical, not linear. Death isn't failure, it's necessary renewal. Even the choice of Nanahuatzin as the true sun carries profound meaning. The Aztecs saw strength in humility, divinity in suffering, teaching that the greatest light often comes from the unlikeliest of places. And if you stand very still at dawn in Mexico, some say you can still hear the echo of his sacrifice the moment a broken god became the sun so we could live beneath its warmth. The court stood silent, the great rubber ball motionless between them until the lords of Xibalba made their move. Hunahpu and Xbalanque, the hero twins of Mayan myth, had been summoned to the underworld not for glory but for a game rigged from the start. The lords had already killed their father and uncle in this same ball court centuries earlier, leaving their skulls dangling from a calabash tree like grisly trophies. But the twins weren't here for revenge. They were here to rewrite the rules of life and death itself. Xibalba wasn't just an underworld, it was a house of illusions where stairs turned to knives and flowers breathed poison. The twins faced tests designed to break both body and spirit. In the razor house, blades sprang from walls like vengeful spirits. In the cold house, winds sharp as obsidian sliced through flesh. Each trial revealed a deeper truth. The lords of Xibalba fed on fear. When commanded to bring back flowers from the Garden of Torment, where blossoms dripped with blood, the twins sent a swarm of ants to retrieve them, outwitting despair with ingenuity. Even their greatest defeat, being burned alive and ground into dust, became a victory in disguise. Sprinkled into the river, their ashes transformed into catfish, then back into human form, now stronger than ever. But the true masterpiece of their cunning came in the final act. Disguising themselves as wandering performers, they danced for the Xibalbans, slicing through dogs and rebuilding them whole, setting houses ablaze only to restore them intact. When the underworld lords begged to experience such magic themselves, the twins obliged, then left them in pieces. The message was clear: you cannot cheat death, but you can humble it. Their resurrection of their father cemented their legacy. Using the spit of a goddess and the bones of the old gods, they remade him as the maize god, a symbol of life's unending cycle. This wasn't just a myth, it was the Mayan answer to darkness. Every ball game played in Mesoamerica's great courts echoed their struggle. Every sprouting cornstalk mirrored their resurrection. The twins didn't conquer death. They taught us to dance with it, to play the game knowing the score was never final, and that sometimes the way out of the underworld isn't through the door, but through the story you leave behind. In the beginning, there were only the Maker and the feathered serpent, floating in a world where the sky slept on the sea, and the earth had yet to dream of corn. Unlike the abrupt "let there be light" of Genesis, the Mayan creation story unfolded through trial and error, gods fumbling toward perfection like potters refining clay. Their first attempt birthed humans from mud, but these beings crumbled under rain, their words dissolving like wet parchment. Next came wooden people, stiff-limbed and hollow-hearted, who forgot to worship their creators and were swallowed by jaguars and grinding stones. Only then did the gods discover the true ingredient for humanity: maize, golden and resilient, ground into dough and kneaded with the blood of gods themselves. This wasn't just creation, it was alchemy. The Popol Vuh's insistence on multiple drafts contrasts starkly with Genesis's 6-day certainty. Where the Bible's God crafts Adam from dust in a single breath, the Mayan deities labored through iterations, their failures etched into myth like cracks in ancient pottery. The symbolism is potent: mud people, frail as riverbanks; wooden people, brittle as drought-stricken trees; and finally, corn people, whose very bones were threaded with the resilience of stalks that bend but don't break. Modern genetics unknowingly echoes this. Maize DNA is so complex it baffled scientists for decades, as if the crop itself guarded divine secrets. The blood sacrifice in the final recipe unveils another layer. While Genesis frames humans as stewards of Eden, the Popol Vuh makes them indebted from birth, their existence purchased with divine blood. This wasn't cruelty, it was cosmic accounting. For the Maya, life demanded reciprocity. Every ear of corn harvested, every drop of blood spilled in ritual repaid that original debt. Even their ball games mirrored this balance, where victory and sacrifice were two sides of the same blade. Yet beneath the myth lies a startling agricultural truth. Maize wasn't just sustenance for the Maya, it was the scaffolding of their civilization. The Popol Vuh's corn-born humans reflect a reality where cities like Tikal rose on the backbone of milpa farming, and kings dressed as maize gods to embody the cycle of growth and rebirth. When Spanish chroniclers recorded the story post-conquest, they missed the irony. The very grain that birthed Mayan culture would later feed the colonizers who sought to erase it. The tale's enduring power lies in its humility. Unlike Genesis's flawless creation, the Popol Vuh admits the gods' imperfections, their experiments, their frustrations, their need for collaboration with lesser deities like the howler monkey scribes. It's a creation story that celebrates persistence, where humanity's value isn't handed down by divine decree, but earned through shared struggle. And when the first true humans finally emerged, their flesh woven from sunlight and rain, their voices strong enough to chant the gods' names, they carried within them the memory of every failure that made them possible. The sky used to race across the heavens, the sun sprinting from horizon to horizon, leaving barely enough time to cook a meal or finish a song before darkness fell. No one dared challenge this, no one except Maui, the trickster demigod whose laughter shook palm trees and whose audacity made even the gods nervous. Armed with nothing but his grandmother's jawbone and a rope woven from his sister's hair, he waited atop the volcano Haleakala, watching the sun's first rays crest the ocean. As the fiery orb charged past, Maui lassoed it with a throw so precise it snared the sun's very legs, binding it to the mountain. The sun roared, thrashed, threatened to burn the world to cinders, until Maui grinned and offered a deal. "Travel slower," he said, raising the jawbone like a club, "or I'll break every one of your legs." From that day forward, the sun learned patience, lengthening the days just enough for mothers to dry their tapa cloth and fishermen to mend their nets. But Maui's boldest feat began as a joke, a boast to his brothers that he could catch a fish bigger than any island. They mocked him until he carved a magical fishhook from the bones of an ancestor, chanting incantations that made the ocean itself shiver. When the hook plunged into the depths, Maui didn't just catch a fish, he hooked Te Ika a Moi, the great fish of the ocean floor. With his brothers paddling furiously, Maui hauled the creature to the surface, its scales transforming into forests, its fins into mountain ridges. That fish became Aotearoa's North Island, while Maui's canoe capsized beneath him, forming the South Island. The brothers, panicked as the land rose beneath them, hacked at the fish without permission, carving valleys and rivers with their knives. That's why, say the Maori, the North Island still trembles. Its hills and gorges the scars of Maui's siblings' fear. Fire, though, was the one treasure the gods kept jealously from mortals. While other cultures told of Prometheus stealing flame from Olympus, Maui's version was far messier. He watched the divine firebirds, the kakariki, guard their embers in the underworld and devised a plan so reckless it bordered on madness. Transforming into a scraggly, injured pigeon, he flopped at the birds' feet, whimpering until they took pity and carried him to their sacred fires. The moment their backs turned, Maui seized a burning branch and bolted, his wings shedding feathers as the enraged birds gave chase. Fire scorched his claws, his beak, his tail, and that's why, to this day, pigeons bear red marks on their feet. a permanent souvenir of the day Maui ran so fast he tripped over the horizon, scattering embers across every island in Polynesia. What makes Maui's legends timeless isn't just their whimsy. These stories are masterclasses in Polynesian values: cleverness over brute strength, negotiation over domination, and the belief that even the smallest being can outwit the gods if they're brave enough. Unlike Hercules or Thor, Maui rarely wins through sheer power. His victories come from timing, improvisation, and a healthy disrespect for rules. When he slows the sun, it's not just for practical reasons. It's a reminder that time itself is negotiable if you're bold enough to grab it by the ankles. His fishing exploits explain not just landforms but humanity's right to shape their environment. And that stolen fire, it's no pristine Olympic gift, it's a messy, hard-won prize carried in the beak of a trickster who still bears the burns. Modern echoes of Maui shimmer everywhere, from Disney's animated portrayal to the way Pacific navigators still chant his name when reading star paths. But the deepest truth lies in his flaws. Maui fails as often as he succeeds. He loses his magical fishhook in some versions. His attempt to conquer death ends disastrously when a laughing bird wakes Hain Nui Te Po, the goddess of night, who crushes him between her thighs. Yet these failures make him more beloved, not less, because Maui isn't just a hero. He's the cheeky younger brother of the cosmos, the one who pulls the universe's ponytail just to see what'll happen, and in doing so, teaches us that even gods can be taken down a peg by someone willing to try the ridiculous. Jason's name should have been etched in glory, but history remembers him as a man who stood in the shadows of his own legend. The Golden Fleece wasn't just a prize, it was his birthright, stolen by a usurper king who sent him on an impossible quest to reclaim it. The Argo, the first ship ever built with the god's blessing, carried a crew too extraordinary to belong to any single myth. Hercules, still mourning the family he'd slaughtered in madness; Orpheus, whose lyre could calm storms; Atalanta, the huntress faster than any man; and 50 more, each a legend in their own right. Yet this wasn't a story about teamwork. It was a lesson in how ambition can unravel even the mightiest heroes. Their voyage reads like a catalogue of ancient Greece's worst nightmares. The Harpies, winged horrors with faces like starving women, plagued the blind prophet Phineus until the Boreads chased them to the edge of the world. The clashing rocks, towering sentinels that crushed ships like eggshells, parted only when the Argo's crew released a dove to time the deadly rhythm. And then came the fleece itself, guarded not just by a dragon, but by an entire kingdom's worth of treachery. King Aeetes of Colchis welcomed Jason with a smile as sharp as a sacrificial knife, demanding he plow a field with fire-breathing bulls and sow it with dragon's teeth before even glimpsing the fleece. Enter Medea. The princess of Colchis wasn't just a witch, she was a storm in human form, her veins running with the blood of Helios, her knowledge of potions so vast she could stitch the sky back together if it tore. When she first saw Jason, the gods had already woven their fates together not with thread but with barbed wire. Her betrayal of her father was swift and brutal. Enchanted ointment to shield Jason from the bull's flames, a whispered spell to confuse the warriors sprouting from dragon teeth, and finally, a lullaby sung in the tongue of serpents to put the guardian dragon to sleep. What happens next is where the myth curdles. Jason swore oaths to Medea under the gaze of Hecate, pledging eternal love in exchange for her magic. But once the fleece was secure and they'd fled Colchis pursued by her brother, whom she dismembered and scattered across the waves to slow their pursuers, Jason's gratitude crumbled like wet sand. Back in Greece, when a king offered him a crown in exchange for abandoning Medea, he didn't hesitate. The woman who'd murdered and schemed for him became an inconvenience. Medea's revenge wasn't just wrath, it was poetry. She slaughtered their sons with a knife still sticky from the golden robes she'd gifted Jason's new bride, robes that burst into flames, consuming the girl and her father in a single inferno. The Argonauts' voyage should have been a triumph. Instead, it became a warning. Some quests change you, and not always for the better. Hercules left early, called to his own labors. Orpheus returned only to lose Eurydice twice, and Jason, he died alone, crushed by the rotting hulk of the Argo, the ship that once carried heroes now reduced to a tomb. The fleece, that shining symbol of kingship, brought no one happiness, just a trail of blood from Colchis to Corinth. Perhaps that's the real lesson hidden in the myth. Glory isn't something you find, it's something you survive. The sea was calm the day Atlantis vanished, or at least that's how Plato imagined it in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Not with earthquakes or fire, but with a single, unthinkable wave, swallowing a civilization so advanced it made Athens look like a backward village. But here's the twist: Atlantis was never meant to be real. Plato concocted the island empire as a philosophical parable, a cautionary tale about hubris and the fragility of power. In his telling, Atlantis was a utopia gone rotten, a society of god-kings who descended into greed, provoking Zeus to wipe them from the earth as punishment. It was a warning to his fellow Athenians, not a history lesson. Yet somehow, over 2 millennia, this fictional allegory became the holy grail of lost civilizations, inspiring treasure hunters, conspiracy theorists, and even Nazi occultists. What makes the Atlantis myth so irresistible? Start with the details. Plato invented the concentric rings of water and land, the towering statues of gold and orichalcum, the canals so precise they seemed drawn by the gods themselves. These weren't just set dressing, they were deliberate contrasts to Athens' modest democracy. Atlantis symbolized the dangers of unchecked militarism and materialism, a mirror held up to Plato's own society. But later interpreters, from Renaissance scholars to Victorian mystics, stripped away the moral and inflated the spectacle. Ignatius Donnelly's 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, rebranded the island as a hyper-technological paradise, the mother culture of all ancient civilizations. Never mind that Plato's Atlantis sank around 600 BC, thousands of years before the pyramids. The allure of a forgotten golden age proved too seductive for facts. The real irony lies in the modern hunt for Atlantis. Explorers have found it everywhere, off the coast of Cyprus, buried under Antarctica, even lurking in the Sahara. Each theory cherry-picks Plato's descriptions while ignoring his explicit framing as a moral fable. The most persistent candidate, the Minoan civilization on Santorini, fits some clues: volcanic destruction, advanced seafaring culture, but clashes with Plato's timeline and location. Archaeologists groan at these attempts, pointing out that Plato's Atlantis was intentionally placed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a symbolic realm of the unknown, not a GPS coordinate. Perhaps Atlantis endures because it's the ultimate Rorschach test for human ambition. For some, it's a warning of ecological collapse, a prehistoric allegory for climate change. For others, it's a fantasy of lost glory, proof that our ancestors were wiser than we are. The Nazis twisted it into Aryan propaganda, while New Agers imagine it as a spiritual Shangri-La. Plato's original message that no society, no matter how mighty, is immune to corruption gets drowned out by the roar of waves and the clatter of shovels. The most haunting part: if Atlantis were ever found, it would cease to be Atlantis. Its power lies in the searching, not the discovery, because some truths, like the ocean, are deeper than the ruins they hide. These ancient myths, though separated by continents and centuries, are bound by threads that stretch straight to the heart of what it means to be human. They whisper the same questions we still ask in the dark. What do we owe the gods, and what do we owe each other? How do we face the monsters outside our doors and the ones inside ourselves? Whether it's Thor wrestling with humiliation, Medea sharpening her vengeance, or Maui laughing in the face of the impossible, these stories aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors held up to our deepest fears and wildest hopes. Consider how often these tales return to sacrifice. The brutal cost of creation in the Enuma Elish, Orpheus's fatal glance, Tyr's severed hand holding Fenrir at bay. These aren't just dramatic flourishes, they echo the painful truth that nothing meaningful is won without loss. The Aztecs knew this when they fed the sun with blood, the Norse when they bound the wolf with a ribbon of impossibilities. Even the happy endings are shadowed: Persephone's pomegranate seeds, Baldur's irreversible death, the Maya hero twins' hard-won resurrection. These myths refuse to sugarcoat reality. They remind us that light cannot exist without darkness, and that every triumph leaves scars. Yet there's also breathtaking audacity in these stories: mortals who outwit gods, tricksters who steal fire, women who rewrite their fates. The defiance of Ariadne handing Theseus that thread, the quiet courage of Gunlod guarding the mead of poetry, the cunning of Aim Nouzum dancing the sun back into the sky. These characters don't just accept their destinies, they tug at the seams of the universe, demanding more. That tension between acceptance and rebellion, fate and free will, is what makes these myths pulse with life even today. So tell me, which of these tales lingers in your imagination? Is it the heartbreaking loyalty of Gilgamesh clutching Enkidu's body, or the unsettling prophecy of Cassandra, cursed to see the future but never be believed? Drop your favorites in the comments. I'd love to hear which stories resonate with you, and if these legends have sparked your curiosity, follow the threads further. Visit the British Museum's Assyrian galleries to see Gilgamesh's epic etched on clay, or stand before the towering Olmec heads in Mexico and wonder about the myths lost to time. Pick up translations of the Poetic Edda or the Popol Vuh, where the voices of the ancients still vibrate with urgency, because these aren't just relics. They're living conversations passed from generation to generation, asking us what we'll add to the story.